When you do what I do for a living, there are a few things that you can guarantee every single year when it comes to Apple. You can guarantee new iPhones are coming in September and that they'll basically be the same as last year, but with better cameras. You can guarantee that Siri is going to be just as bad this year as it was last year. And you can guarantee that the latest version of iOS will be exactly one number higher than the year before. But this year, it looks like we might be in for a couple of changes to that pattern. First, we might just see an improved Siri announced at WWDC 2025. And second, more unusually, we're looking at a complete change in naming convention for all of Apple's operating systems. According to recent reports, Apple is planning to skip iOS 19 entirely and jump straight to iOS 26. The idea is to bring the version number in line with the year in which most people will be using it. So rather than releasing iOS 19 in 2025, Apple will release iOS 26 to match the year 2026. And it isn't just iOS, the change appears to be happening across the board. So we'll see macOS 26, iPadOS 26, watchOS 26, tvOS 26, and for those of us who own a Vision Pro, we'll also be jumping from visionOS 2 all the way to visionOS 26, which is quite a leap. But why? And what does it mean to us? Those are the questions I'm going to try and answer in this video, because I actually think that when you scratch beneath the surface, this is more than just a name change. This could be the rabbit out of the hat that Apple so badly needed to put itself back at the top of the tech world after, let's be honest, a pretty terrible 12 months. Oh, and if you have your own thoughts about this, leave a comment. So in terms of why we're expecting this kind of change, there are a few schools of thought, some more positive and some a bit more skeptical. So we'll start with the optimistic view. The redesign that Apple is planning with this next version of iOS is rumored to be the biggest visual change since iOS 7, which came out all the way back in 2013. So if we're looking at it in terms of time, that's a 12-year gap between major visual overhauls. It is very much a once-in-a-decade moment, and it would make sense for Apple to hold off on any sort of rebranding until a moment like this. It wouldn't have made sense to do it last year. Equally, it would seem like a missed opportunity if they waited until next year. It also lines up nicely with the idea that a new name or version number could go hand in hand with an iOS that looks and feels markedly different from the one that we've become so used to. So in terms of what that new design might look like, the rumors are suggesting that Apple has taken most of its inspiration from visionOS, the operating system used on the Vision Pro headset. If you've ever used a Vision Pro or seen it in action, you'll know what that means. But for most people that haven't, visionOS is all about spatial computing. Think of apps and interfaces that float around you. The look is very translucent, it's very soft with lots of menus that appear in a layered kind of way, almost hovering over the background. It feels very fluid and airy. Circular icons are a big part of visionOS too. Now, while we probably won't see the iPhone suddenly switch to fully circular icons, I wouldn't be surprised if Apple leans into a softer, more curved aesthetic, moving away from the sharp, blocky squares that we've had on the home screen for years now. That said, this does appear to be more of a visual refresh than a complete rethink of how iOS works. So you're not going to suddenly need to relearn how to use your iPhone from scratch. From Apple's point of view, that's really important. They've spent decades building muscle memory into their user base. And if the backlash to last year's photo app redesign taught them anything, it is that people really don't like dramatic change, even when the underlying improvements are actually quite good. So I think what Apple will be trying to do here is walk that tightrope, make it feel new and fresh enough that it doesn't look stale, but not so different that people start to feel lost. The other big motivator here for Apple, I think, is going to be uniformity. If you take a step back and look at all the different operating systems Apple currently has in the wild, you've got the big ones, iOS, iPadOS, and macOS. But then you've also got watchOS and visionOS for the Vision Pro and tvOS for the Apple TV. And even though tvOS might not feel like a major player, I actually think it's a really important piece of Apple's long-term strategy. Mark Gurman at Bloomberg has talked a lot over the past year about Apple's ambitions to expand further into the home. In the short term, that includes devices like the rumored tabletop iPad/HomePod hybrid, and this would act as a kind of smart hub for your home, powered by the new Siri when it eventually arrives. It's designed to differentiate between different users, provide tailored information like asking about your calendar, your partner's or your kids, and control smart home devices in a way that is much more intuitive than what we've got right now with the current Home app, which is pretty awful. And I think that Apple TV still plays a role in that vision. Even if it doesn't feel like a headline product, Apple is still heavily investing in Apple TV Plus, despite the fact that it's currently losing money. The reason is fairly obvious. Most people finish their day by sitting on the sofa and watching TV. If Apple can make that experience part of their broader ecosystem, then they're one step closer to becoming the central tech layer in your home. So bringing all of these platforms into a single naming system, iOS 26, macOS 26, tvOS 26, and so on, helps reinforce that feeling of a unified ecosystem. It all starts to look and behave the same way across every device, and that's where Apple excels. Once you're in the Apple ecosystem, it's really hard to leave. The more consistent everything feels, from your phone to your Mac to your watch to your TV, the less appealing it becomes to consider switching to Android or Windows or some other system that's going to behave totally differently and require relearning everything. Now, I did say that I had a slightly more cynical reason for this whole rebranding move, so let's talk about that for a moment. And I will start with a quick caveat. Companies like Apple don't tend to make these decisions lightly or in the short term, so the odds are this redesign and renaming strategy has been in the works for years now. But still, I do think there is a valid argument to be made that this could also be a bit of a distraction technique, because if we're being honest, Apple has really dropped the ball on software over the past 12 months, especially when it comes to AI. Cast your mind back to WWDC 2024. That was the big moment where Apple officially unveiled Apple Intelligence. And yes, they've delivered some of what they promised, but the reality is that most of what they've rolled out has been lukewarm at best. Take the writing tools, for example. Yes, you can rewrite a sentence on device using Apple's local models, but it isn't dramatically better than a glorified spell checker until you add ChatGPT into the mix. And the second you do that, well, you're relying on OpenAI's technology and not Apple's. Image cleanup is another one. It can be useful so long as you're just removing something obvious from a still photo, like someone walking through the background of a beach shot or a random object in your garden. But the second that you try to do anything more advanced, it really starts to fall apart. And when you compare it to what Samsung can do with their AI editing tools, or even just what ChatGPT and other web tools can manage, it just feels underpowered. As for the rest of Apple's AI features, most of them are gimmicky. Genmoji is fun for all of 5 minutes. Image Playground is clever, but again, not something that the vast majority of people are ever going to seriously use. And for all the marketing talk about on-device processing and privacy, the end result just hasn't been especially useful. The one feature that was supposed to really impress everyone, the new version of Siri. This was the one that was meant to change everything. The presentation last year showed a totally rebuilt Siri, one that could understand context, carry out genuinely helpful tasks, and feel like a modern, smarter system. We saw demos of it parsing messages and emails to answer questions like, what time does my mum's flight arrive? We saw it digging through your photo library, finding a scan of your driving license, pulling out the license number, and pasting it into a form, all with a simple voice command. The problem was that none of that actually existed. At the time of the announcement, reports suggest that even the engineering teams at Apple had no idea how those features were supposed to work, because they hadn't been built. It was all marketing mock-ups. And while it isn't unusual for companies to simulate software during product keynotes, there is a line between a live demo and total fabrication. And now they're in hot water. There are legal challenges on the horizon, and they've definitely taken a hit in terms of trust, which is why I think Apple is going to be extremely cautious this year at WWDC. They'll want to avoid over-promising. They'll want to make sure that anything they show off is actually deliverable. And in a year where their competitors are moving fast in AI, Apple still needs something to show. And that's where I think this rebrand comes in. A full visual redesign and a new naming convention gives them just enough to dominate the headlines. It gives the appearance of change, even if the real, meaningful changes, the ones related to Siri and AI, aren't quite ready yet. Maybe that's the point. This year, the redesign buys them time. It keeps people talking, gets the press excited, and it gives Apple the breathing room it needs to actually get its AI strategy together in time for next year. By the way, very quickly, if you enjoy the kind of iPhone and Mac tutorial content that I share here on the channel, you should definitely check out my dedicated training portals. iPhone Essentials Plus has been out for a couple of months now, and Mac Essentials Plus is launching in about a week's time. These are full training hubs designed to help you get the most out of your Apple products, with content broken down into easy-to-follow modules. Each lesson includes a short how-to video, a step-by-step guide with screenshots, and a downloadable PDF that you can keep for offline use. Both portals feature well over 150 lessons each, and I'm constantly adding new content. If you'd like to learn more, scan the QR codes on screen or click the links in the description. All right, so enough about why Apple might be making this change. Let's talk about what we're actually expecting to see in the next version of iOS, because even though we're still a way off the official announcement, rumors are already starting to circulate. Now, I think it's safe to say that we'll get the usual handful of minor updates to the major apps like we do every year. A couple of new features in Notes, maybe some tweaks to reminders, some small changes to Calendar, Safari, Mail, nothing groundbreaking, but the usual iterative improvements. One thing I've personally hoped for over the years is more collaboration between these apps. I really think Mail, Calendar, Notes, and Reminders should be treated more like a unified productivity suite, and we saw the start of that last year with the Calendar and Reminders integration, but it would be great to see Apple take that even further this year. So far, though, there haven't really been any strong rumors pointing in that direction. What has been rumored more consistently is an expansion of artificial intelligence. Yes, I'm calling it artificial intelligence within those existing apps, but in more subtle and useful ways. For example, one leak suggests that we'll be getting an AI-powered battery management system. The idea here is that your iPhone would learn how you use your device and then make dynamic adjustments to limit background activity or system-level drain without disrupting your experience. The goal would be to reduce battery usage in smart ways without you needing to manually change dozens of settings. And honestly, I think that's a great idea. I've made plenty of videos over the years talking about how to squeeze more battery life out of your iPhone, what to switch off, what settings to tweak, but realistically, most people don't want to spend time doing that. Most people just want to charge their phone, use it all day, and not worry about it dying by 3 p.m. This also ties in with some of the other recent moves that Apple has made, like the launch of the iPhone 16e earlier this year. This was the first device to feature Apple's in-house C1 modem chip. Apple promised similar performance to Qualcomm's modems, but with much better power efficiency. Great for a budget iPhone, but even more important for an iPhone 17 Air, which is expected to be the thinnest iPhone Apple has ever made. And we all know what happens when a device gets thinner. The battery capacity usually takes a hit. So if Apple wants to sell millions of ultra-thin iPhones, they have to solve the battery life problem. More efficient in-house silicon helps, but pairing that with an AI tool that learns your behavior and adapts battery usage in real time could be a key part of that solution. Because otherwise, you end up with a phone that looks and feels amazing, but dies before you get home for dinner, and that could be a serious problem for Apple. Along the same lines of taking existing technology and applying a layer of AI over the top, one area where Apple is expected to make some big strides is with the Health app. Now, we might not see this straight away in the initial release. It's been suggested that it could be part of the 0.4 update, which typically rolls out the following spring, but the feature in question is an AI-powered health coach. The basic idea is that for years now, most of us have been collecting a huge amount of personal health data through our iPhones and our Apple Watches. That includes everything from step counts and exercise to heart rate, sleep, even diet. And for the most part, that data just sits there. It is stored securely, it's local, it's private, but unless you're exporting it to a doctor or a specialist, it doesn't really do anything for you. So what Apple is allegedly working on is an AI model that understands health data deeply, something that can take all of this information that you're already collecting and actually turn it into meaningful insights, not just trends or averages, but specific actionable advice tailored to you. The goal is to help people understand what the numbers mean, what they can change in their lifestyle, and ideally, make those changes in a way that's sustainable. This is something that's reportedly been in the works for a long time now, and all signs suggest that Apple is finally ready to start rolling it out as part of iOS 26. We already know that Apple has made some major improvements to its accessibility suite on the iPhone, and that's because Apple tends to release this information ahead of time each year, and this year has been no different. One of the big additions we're getting is App Store accessibility labels. These are like nutrition labels for accessibility, showing you right there on the app's product page which accessibility features are supported. So whether it's voiceover, voice control, captions, or support for reduced motion, you'll know before you download whether the app is going to work for your needs. We're also getting an accessibility version of Reader, which is designed to make on-screen text much easier to read for users with a variety of vision or cognitive impairments. There are CarPlay accessibility upgrades on the way too, and speaking personally, as someone with a father who wears hearing aids but still struggles to hear CarPlay's voice while driving, I can tell you that these changes are going to be an absolute game changer for a lot of people. And that's just the beginning. Apple has promised a load of additional accessibility improvements in the next version of iOS, and I'll be covering all of them here on the channel as soon as they become available. If you're enjoying the content here, why not sign up for my weekly newsletter, which is all about tech news and tips delivered free to your inbox each Friday. Sign up via the QR code on screen or the link in the description. And then, of course, there's Siri. And I've deliberately saved this until the end of the video because this is the bit that has the biggest question mark over it. Apple is in a really tricky spot here. If they don't mention Siri at WWDC this year, it is only going to reinforce the belief that everything we saw in last year's WWDC keynote was basically made up. Because let's not forget the features that they showcased for the new and improved Siri were said to be rolling out over the course of the year. And here we are, one full calendar year later, and we haven't really seen any of them. Apple, as we know, is not a company that likes to admit mistakes. If they can spin a story into a positive, they will. And if they can't, they tend to stay silent. So I do think it's entirely possible that Siri doesn't even get a mention at WWDC this year, just like AI didn't get a mention at WWDC in 2023. But if Apple does talk about Siri, I think there are going to be two versions of it. A good enough for now version that we might see soon, and a proper upgrade that's still probably years away. So what could the good enough version look like? It might bring in personal context. This is where Siri could track things like your emails, your messages, your files, your photos, and then use that information to answer specific natural language questions. Something like, where's the recipe my sister sent me last week? And it would go off, search your messages and pull it up for you. That sort of context-aware functionality wouldn't be anything groundbreaking, but it would be genuinely useful, and it feels well within the realms of possibility. Other features could include things like, what's my driving license number? Or what's my national insurance number? And Siri would be able to find that information from scans or notes saved on your device. Another feature we've heard about is on-screen awareness, which is where Siri would be able to see what you're looking at and take action. So if someone texts you a new address and you say update their contact card, Siri would handle the entire process for you. That was actually something that Apple demoed last year, and it would genuinely make the assistant much more powerful. There's also talk of better app integration, so being able to say things like, make the colors in this photo pop a bit more, and have Siri edit the photo for you. Simple things, but things that today's Siri just can't do. But again, whether any of this gets shown at WWDC or even talked about is still a bit up in the air. Apple might choose to wait until iOS 26.4 or even push this into iOS 27 territory. Because the risk is that if they announce it now, there is a 3-month gap before iOS 26 officially releases in September. And that's a long time for people to pick it apart, especially given the criticism that Apple faced last year. Holding off until the software is actually ready might be the safer option. Now, the second version of Siri, the one that I do not think we're going to see anytime soon, is what's being referred to as LLM Siri. This is the large language model version of Siri that would behave more like a chatbot, along the lines of Google Gemini or ChatGPT. And let's be honest, it would be a massive leap for Apple to go from where they are now to that level of capability in one go. That said, it does feel like this is ultimately where Apple wants to get to. And as consumers, I think most of us are expecting something like that to arrive eventually. But if I had to bet, I would say we're not seeing that level of Siri this year, probably not even next year. But it's clearly the direction that they're heading in. All right, so my thoughts on all of this. I'll be honest, I hadn't really considered the idea of an iOS rebranding at all prior to reading the same articles that everyone else has been reading over the past 24 hours about this. But the more I stop to think about it, the more I think this is a genius power play by a company with its back against the wall that knew it had to do something significant in order to regain the trust of its consumers. And like I said earlier on in the video, I'm not going to pretend that decisions like this get made on a whim at Apple because I don't believe that they do. I'm more akin to believe that this is a happy coincidence, that this year just happens to be the year that Apple needed an ace up its sleeve, and they've been able to pull that out. But I do genuinely think that the combination of the biggest iOS visual redesign in more than a decade, along with a rebranding of all the operating systems to give uniformity across all of the different devices, is a really, really clever move by Apple. I think Apple knows that they messed up at WWDC last year. I think they're a company that is becoming increasingly infamous over the years for appearing like they either don't know or don't care what the public think about them, but they do. They absolutely do. Just like every major company knows what the press and the public is saying about them, Apple is very aware of what people are saying about them. They just like to pretend that they're not a lot of the time. And I don't think we're going to be getting an apology. I don't even think we're going to be getting an acknowledgement of fault from last year for the most obvious reason. Apple is facing lawsuits around WWDC 2024, so admitting fault would of course open yourself up to being liable in all of those cases. But I think Apple does know that it can't just be a business as usual WWDC this year. It would almost be a little bit embarrassing to pretend like that's the case. So I think Apple is very aware that they have to come out swinging, and they have to come out with something that people weren't expecting. And I think this combination of a visual overhaul and a complete rebrand would be a good way for them to do that. I also genuinely believe in the whole ethos of AI for the rest of us. I hated the Apple Intelligence branding last year. I thought it was very stereotypical Apple, quite egotistical and, ironically, a little bit tone deaf when you consider how poorly it's been implemented. But I like the idea of saying that artificial intelligence as a tool needs to be more than some overly complicated, convoluted add-on that the majority of people just aren't going to use. It needs to be this really well thought out tool that just fits in with everything we already have going on in the world to make our lives easier. And I do believe that ethos and that idea which Apple has been working towards is where I would like to see AI go. It's one of the main reasons why I resist the temptation to switch to a Google phone or a Samsung phone, because I do genuinely believe in this idea of Apple's vision of what AI is supposed to be and how AI is supposed to work. I think the battery intelligence, while it may not be the most exciting new tool and while it may not be something that you're going to look at or spend time with every day, I also think that's kind of the point of it. It's supposed to be an intelligent tool that just runs in the background, requires no input from you, but makes your life markedly better by its existence. The health coach, I think, is a brilliant idea, and for me, would reinforce my confidence in recording my health data in Apple Health. Because unless it becomes more than just a collection of data, well, until it becomes more than just a collection of data, it's a bit of a waste of time. So I think an AI-powered health coach that can look at that data and help me to make positive decisions would be a really exciting tool as well. Whenever we get at WWDC in just over a week now, you can rest assured that here on the channel, I will be covering everything in huge amounts of detail, both at the announcements in June, but also in September when the new operating systems launch. And just a reminder, if you enjoy the kind of tutorial content that I include here on the channel, do check out my training product, iPhone Essentials Plus, and my soon-to-launch Mac Essentials Plus. I'll include the QR codes for both of them on screen, and of course the links in the description of the video. So what do you think about iOS 26? Are there features that you think Apple should be adding, or maybe some long overdue fixes that you're hoping to finally see? Drop me a comment and let me know. And as ever, if you found this video useful, do please consider leaving me a like and subscribing to the channel for more content like this in the future. See you on the next video.